the Leader of the Opposition has to stop sensationalizing these issues. What you've just said is seizure of guns and destruction of property. So we now have the Leader of the Opposition saying that the RCMP destroyed property during what was the worst natural disaster in Alberta's history. I don't buy that.
Alberta Premier Alison Redford, that was a couple of weeks ago when she was denying reality. Of course, the RCMP have admitted they did kick down doors. They've admitted they kicked down doors in areas not flooded. They've admitted to gun seizures. But Alison Redford can't handle reality, not even after she agreed that the provincial flood program would compensate residents of High River that had their doors kicked in by the Mounties. Here is Premier Redford earlier today after saying they would, still trying to blame it on the opposition.
And I'm very disappointed still, as I said 2 weeks ago, to see people trying to make hay out of this when the RCMP were doing their job.
Joining me now is the woman allegedly making hay out of this. Danielle Smith is the MLA for High River. She's also the leader of the official opposition. Ms. Smith, I have to ask you, are you making hay out of this? Because your first comments after the flooding created a buzz in the firearms community because they thought, well, she's not on side. Then you said, well, we're hearing stories, so let's look into this. Then you wrote to the Premier saying, can you help out? Where did you politicize this?
I think that what the Premier is missing, I think the Premier clearly wasn't being properly briefed. Her first reaction to say that there was no property damage, what I said is she was either clueless or she was willfully ignorant or she wasn't telling the truth. And even now, for her to actually have made the right decision, but failed to acknowledge that she was mistaken, and now they've done the right thing, I think that's disappointing. But that's all I was seeking, is that when I was looking at this issue, we knew that there were problems, and as long as those problems were getting solved, I was prepared to keep the temperature down. But when I found out 1,900 homes had had doors and windows broken, and the RCMP was refusing to pay compensation and didn't know who would, I had to stand up for my constituents.
Well, these are the people that you are representing in the Alberta legislature. Right. So you've held a town hall with the RCMP present, though. They don't deny knocking in doors. And you held that 2 days later. They admit they knocked down doors in order to gain entry and then tracked toxic mud through people's carpets. That was another complaint that people had.
Yes.
Tracking that stuff, you have to essentially get rid of the carpets. It's not just a question of vacuuming. So they admitted to that. Why would the Premier say it didn't happen and still claim that standing up for your constituents is politicization?
Well, I think that's, I guess, a really good question to ask the Premier, because I would say that it's actually her government that has been politicizing this. There was a very simple solution all the way along here. When they discovered that the RCMP felt that the province and the town should bear the compensation, they should have said, okay, we will pay out the compensation and then we'll take it up with the federal government, which is exactly what they announced yesterday. I don't know why we had to have 2 weeks of angst and acrimony when they could have ultimately just done the right thing 2 weeks ago. I think that there's a bit of game playing going on here, but it's certainly not on our side. I'm just trying to do what's right for the 1,900 homeowners in High River who were left without information about how their property was going to be fixed after they were forcibly entered, and now they have answers. So I'm actually commending the government on finally acting and finally doing the right thing.
How's the community doing? Are people getting their doors back on the front of their houses? Are people able to move back in now? I know that some parts have been very slow moving in terms of recovery.
It has been, and I think now we have to realize that this issue of the 1,900 doors is just one small part of a bigger problem. The government has been very, very slow in giving the disaster recovery program payments. They promised residents of High River within 2 weeks of applying for the program they'd get $10,000 to start doing those repairs. We're 3 months later, and very few people have received those dollars. So if they can act this quickly and make a decision to be able to deal with the issue of the broken down doors, I think that the next step for the Premier is to fix this program so that people can actually start doing the repairs so they can get on with their lives too, especially with winter coming, and hopefully we'll see that as well.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking, beyond the money, there's the logistics. Your local hardware store, or even several local hardware stores, having 1,900 front doors at once. They just don't keep that in stock. That's a logistic nightmare. Compensation for other people. I know that we have been hard and heavy on the firearms issue, but I've spoken to collectors who say their collections, not only were they seized, but they were damaged. One gentleman telling us stories of tape wrapped around the stocks of several of his firearms. They were shoved together, tape wrapped around them. That took off finish. There's scratches, other problems. Are they going to get compensation from this, or is the Premier still in denial because she denied that they were ever seized to begin with?
That will certainly be the next step. Let's remember there were 1,900 doors that were kicked down. Of those, 104 were homeowners that had firearms taken from them. So the vast majority of doors that were kicked down were not to seize firearms. So 104 homeowners who did have their property taken, and in some cases damaged. That's going to be the next level that the Public Complaints Commission has to look into. I have sent in a 100-page document with stories about how the residents felt that they were treated through this whole process. I will await to see what the Public Complaints Commissioner what his report says. My understanding from what I've heard is they're taking it very, very seriously. They're asking for the RCMP to hand over their notebooks and files. And so I'm going to keep an open mind about what they decide. But I think they've committed to having a report in December. I will keep on putting those stories forward. And then we'll see what steps we have to take after that. But I believe people should be compensated for damage caused by government actions. They've taken a first step on the doors, and then we'll see what happens with the firearms.
As far as making sure this doesn't happen again, have you heard sufficient remorse from Deputy Commissioner Dale McGowan, who's in charge of K Division, also known as Alberta?
Certainly disappointed not to hear any remorse from the Premier. Because let's remember, the RCMP are here under contract with the province of Alberta. And if the Premier has this attitude of, oh well, that's just the kind of thing that happens during these kinds of crises, and no one's allowed to complain about it, nobody is allowed to look at the processes and see if they can be improved, then I think that that's where the lack of leadership is. I think that the Premier does have a leadership role in looking into this issue and establishing protocols to make sure that rules are followed the next time and proper processes are followed the next time. She doesn't seem to have any interest in doing that. That's a shame. But I do hope that something comes out of the Public Complaints Commission that will give some more clear direction, because I don't want to see this happen in any other community.
All right, and nor should it. Danielle Smith, thanks so much, and keep us updated on how the fight for your residents continues.